tradition of the past. They were not people in existence at the present. This is in mid-Michigan, okay, in the 90s. And I thought that if I picked up on the, stereotypical ways of being native, like one with nature, making clay pots, like wearing moccasins, that I could be native. Yeah, there's like so many things wrong with that. But that was how it was presented, right? That is how sort of Native Americans were presented to me. I was also raised Catholic, and those of you that are Catholic know you go through confirmation, right? I picked Caterina Tekakwitha as my patron saint. At the time, she was only blessed, but she is now a saint. So that's how pretty much obsessed I was with this idea of like the native princess and one with nature. I went off to college at the University of Michigan, and while I did not major in anthropology, it was actually history and classical archaeology, I was an anthropology major. I left that program still with the idea and the concept that Native Americans were pretty much non-existent. They were around, but the cultures, the traditions were in the past, which is super sad being an anthro minor, right? So all of this goes back to these biases and stereotypes and assumptions that are still present today. It took me moving to New Mexico in my 20s and being in a place where it is a much more vibrant cultural traditions that I was like, oh, wow, okay, this is messed up. And I did end up going to school for anthropology, and now I teach it, and I attempt to teach it in a way that undermines these assumptions and stereotypes. But they are still there. Oh, I forgot to put Tonto on there. I forgot to put Johnny Depp dressed up as Tonto. I was going to add that in. Ah, shoot. But these are stereotypes that are still there. Romanticizing this, putting it into the past, thinking that anyone, because, we're all Americans and we live here, can take over this sort of cultural identity, right? We have mascots of it. And we think that we are, celebrating the culture and traditions, but we are taking it as our own. And we still do this. There's the savior complex, right? The white savior. I can come in and fix everything. I know what's wrong. I know what they need. And I can look really good doing it, right? And then there's the stereotypes, right? Wise elder, Indian princess, an aggressive drunk, right, on the side of the road, the dumb sidekick. Tonto, that's why I was going to add that one in, all right? And then things like, oh, the entire community, all are impoverished in multiple ways, but they also get special treatment and benefits from the U.S. government, right? So there are these stereotypes. Where do they come from? Why do we still have them? And it really starts, of course, with colonization. We all know, unless you are 100% native, at least part of your ancestry is tied to colonization, right? Unless you're 100%, it is tied to colonization or, caveat, slavery, right? Some people were forced, some people's ancestors were forced here, right? So caveat there. But this settler colonialism is dependent on displacing indigenous peoples. There were no parts of what would become the United States that were empty. It was all being used in one way or another. And that westward expansion does take a while, yes, but eventually all of the land is impacted by colonialism, right? And all of us who have ancestors that were immigrants, whether it was from very early on or, say, like yesterday, are all dependent on this colonialism. Tied to colonialism and starting very early, we have genocide occurring to Native groups. because of that dependence on the land and resources by settlers. Furthermore, Europeans, when they got here, based on like documents and journal entries and everything, native groups were so different. They were another. There wasn't even a way for some Europeans to wrap around. It's not even like there was any connection between, say, their religious beliefs, the European religious beliefs, and the native. Total different worldviews. So instead of trying to understand, they're the other. We got to displace them. We got to get rid of them. Furthermore, it was really easy to recognize them, right? Really easy. Darker skin, odd language, weird beliefs. Let's just get rid of them. Tied to that, there was one thing you could use them for in society: slaves, right? You needed labor. So this is expanding out of just the United States, but in like North America, it's estimated that between 2 and 5.5 million indigenous peoples were enslaved. Technically, this was illegal, but really you could call it something else, indentured servitude, paying off their debts. But it was still slavery. And interestingly, women tended to have a higher price. They could be used for more things. This doesn't stop with early colonialism and trying to displace peoples from their lands. It continues on. We have multiple wars in our history, in the United States history, that are tied to specifically removing native peoples from their land, right? Multiple massacres. People have heard of Wounded Knee, Sand Creek. This is Wounded Knee. Mass grave, right? U.S. Army members that were involved in this were given medals of honor. So it's not just a massacre. It was a celebrated massacre by the United States. You have the French and Indian War before that. That's where you get the biological warfare. Blankets from smallpox victims given to native groups, right? So this is clear genocide of a group or groups, because the other stereotype is that Native American culture is all one thing, and it's not. Then you have further genocide with the forceful removal of peoples from their lands, right? The various marches. We need this space. We are expanding. We being Euro-Americans are expanding. We need it. You guys keep moving west. Let's move you west. Trail of Tears, Long Walk, forceful removal to reservations. Multiple individuals died. Tons of deaths tied to this. We can add an ethnocide, right? If we can't kill them, let's force their culture out of them, right? That's another way. Cultural genocide. Biggest one being the Indian boarding schools. I tried to find an exact number of kids that were forcefully removed from their families and sent to these boarding schools. I couldn't find one. There's no documentation of the number of kids that were removed, which also lends to we can't even document how many kids died in the boarding schools. You have boarding schools from 1634. There are still some around today. I think there are 4 boarding schools still around today. The U.S. government actually ran or supported, there's a lot of words here so I can remember numbers, 408? Oh. And technically, it ended in 1969, I think. The federal supported ones ended in 1969. I need my numbers. But they're actually, in 2022, the government put out a report where they attempted to look into the federally recognized ones. No. So they actually put in a report, and they documented the number of supported ones and what they could find in the documentation. Unfortunately, some of the documentation was lost along the way, but they did note that there was prevalence, that's not the right word, I have it quoted, of assault on these, in these boarding schools. Emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse documented at these schools. Furthermore, they looked into the number of cemeteries, and my number's on there, but there's 50-some of them, 53, okay. Oh, you saw the number, thank you. Numbers. There are 53 documented cemeteries at these, and of them, they can locate some, marked graves, but there are a ton of unmarked graves. This goes back to there's no documentation of the number of kids that were removed. And so there's a, what are we doing? Just gonna attach it there. My numbers. But if you look at when we get the map up and running, the number of schools, still nothing. There's a big cluster around here. In New Mexico, Arizona, and still, well, at least I can look at it and see my numbers. Nope, I can't. So everybody can come around and look at this right here. So we have the boarding schools, right? And so I went into that a little bit. So that is this forced, actual forced removal of cultural traditions, right? The language was beaten out of the kids. The hair was forcefully cut. Hair has important meaning in certain groups. And then beyond that, it doesn't quite stop, still not there. Not only do we have the boarding schools, but then even today, we have blood quantum laws, right? And these start in 1705, I gotta look at my numbers, in Virginia. And it was done originally to make sure that only full-blooded Native Americans got any recognition. So you had to be more than half Native. And so this starts in 1705, but in 1934, we have the Indian Recognition Act to establish who could receive financial benefits. So you have to have a specific portion of Native ancestry, and you have to be able to document that. And then there's variation in how much you need to be recognized as Native. It varies between tribes. And then also, there's questions of mixed ancestry, right? If you have ancestry from multiple tribes, what proportion of each one do you need to be recognized in that tribe? And that can limit the membership, right? So if you don't have enough genetic ancestry from any tribe, even though you are 100% Native, you may not be recognized. What this does is then it limits the number of members for tribes so that then, the government doesn't have to recognize them, right? If there's not enough people, it's not a supported tribe anymore, right? And so that is a way to keep the membership down. Furthermore, we have segregation, right? So does anyone know when Native Americans became U.S. citizens? Lily knows. Anyone? Close.
I was going to guess the first half of the 20th century, but I don't know.
Yeah, 1924, right? In 1940, 1944. 1924, Native Americans were finally recognized as citizens on their own land, right? And at that point, you actually have, Jim Crow laws in place. So segregation tied to Jim Crow laws wasn't just for blacks, but also for natives. So you have segregation on top of these other things that continues. From 1945, I have to look at my dates, to 1968, federal laws actually terminated 100 different tribes that were previously recognized because there weren't enough people. That way they didn't have to be supported or recognized in any way. So we're adding in segregation to genocide and ethnocide, right? So the numbers, that's why I'm like, I need my slides, I need the numbers. It is estimated that in North America, so not just the US, in North America, at contact, there were between 5 and 15 million people. Probably closer to that higher end or in the middle. So this is before contact in the 15th century. In 1890, there were only 238,000 documented Native Americans as the result of genocide and ethnocide. Can you imagine that? Right? That's what we did. That's part of the reckoning on the top of that, on the first slide. That's what we did. Right? I had ancestors around that time. I mean, some are more recent, but that's what we did. Right? In 2024, with that census, there are 6.79 million Native Americans today in the United States. Which is like, oh, that's awesome. Until you realize that's 2.09% of the population. Right? Yes. Probably at the bottom of my bag. Here you go. I'll be done by the time. Okay, so what does that mean for today? Native groups are resilient, right? There is a resilience there. But due to multi-generational trauma that me as an outsider, I can't even understand. Oh, okay, fast forward. We'll fast forward real quick. Thank you. Okay, there we go, back on track, nice work, there we go. So there is resilience, right? Oh, well, did you switch it out?
Yeah.
Oh, sweet, okay, because I'll start moving this one. Okay, we have the resilience, but as an outsider, I had to look into this because I can't understand. Tied to all of this historical trauma, there's a lot of internal documentation of identity issues, right? Once again, I can't understand this, but to me it's like, well, duh, right? The amount of pressures, the amount of things that they went through, boarding schools, entire generations losing their language, losing their cultural traditions, trying to go back to them with elders who may have some of that knowledge, but may not, right? Furthermore, there's I have to admit, my background in anthropology. My predecessors in anthropology really liked to take over cultural traditions and reinterpret them in how we thought they should be. So you have that. You have the stereotypes that have been placed on, the biases from the vast majority of the population, right? 98% are non-native, right? And we feel like we have the right to figure out what it was. Go back to 11-year-old me, right? And then you do have struggle with alcohol, drugs, and depression tied into this trauma, right? Not even going to go into missing, murdered, and indigenous peoples, right? The proportional difference between the violence that is especially placed onto Native women, right? And then multi-generational poverty ties into all of this, right? Reservations have so little access to things like health services, right? Being down in New Mexico for COVID-19, we saw this. All the pueblos. Don't even, on the Navajo res, don't even, how far do you have to go to get to a clinic? Your house doesn't even have running water. You don't have a fully functioning kitchen that we take for granted and just assume everyone has it. This is just a few hours away, right? There's a disproportionate representation of natives in being incarcerated. The amount of poverty, it's like 20% of Native peoples are in poverty, like high levels of poverty, versus the rest of the population is about 8%. At Adams State, I looked at the fall census. I don't know if Becky's here, but I used her numbers. There are only 39 Native American students on campus. This does not include those of that mark 2 or more. This is just solely Native, which seems really low, very low for where we're at. If you look at the San Luis Valley, the proportion of Natives in San Luis Valley is 3%, and that also doesn't include, like those that are 2 or more. Oh, there is Becky. I do. And so you can already see that even though there's a small number in the valley, we don't represent the valley, right? And so if we at Adams State pride ourselves on social mobility, on giving, equitable access to higher education for traditionally underrepresented and underserved populations, I see a hole, right? There's a segment of the population we are not supporting. How can we make the school more welcoming? How can we change that, right? We don't just arm wave. Yeah, we have land acknowledgement. That's great. That's great. Those are words. Do we have an actual action plan? Anyone know that's in higher admin? Have we even thought about this? We made a land statement. Is that good enough? Is that welcoming enough? Those are just words. How can we actually make concrete steps to support Indigenous peoples and communities? This is part of our mission, right? And do we even know what we do? We have a club now. Yay. That's it. So how can we first be allies? Help create a community, a welcoming community. Tied to that is listening, right? Don't just go back to my earlier slides where we know what you need. Lily, I know what you need. Yeah, right, I've studied you, I know. Right? Come on. So one thing is understand that there are a variety of cultural beliefs. There's not one belief. There's not one tradition. There is not one set of rituals or needs. So for those of us that have Native students or work with Natives, don't question when your student needs to miss a week of class for a ritual. Don't expect them to tell you every detail of why they need to miss that week. That's none of my business, right? We have some holidays off. None of them are Native, right? Come from a totally different set of traditions. Furthermore, for those of us that teach, we talk about representing different voices. How many of you actually have literature teachings or perspectives from the Native side in your classes? Right? How many of you even thought about it? Thank you. Right? And then we can add in place-based learning. Right? Go to the tribes that are around us. Go to the reservations that are around us. Right? Bring it into what we're teaching. But that's great being an ally. How can we go further and advocate or even become, the new word, an accomplice? Right? Not just an ally. We can publicly support change. We can foster connections and collaborations with tribes in the region, not telling them what they need, but actually trying to talk to them, figuring out what they need, what we can offer, what we can do. So maybe that's developing programs, right? So what do tribes around the region need? What training do they need? What jobs are they looking to, right? In the business program, can we do something about, the indigenous perspective, right? Architecture has it. We don't have an architecture school, or else I would have gone there. But, what do they need? Not do what we think the tribes need, but what is actually necessary, right? Early childhood. Teachers, right? Can we train teachers? Nurses. Those are things that are needed. But do we offer it? Do we see what would help bring in students? Probably not. So develop those programs in partnership with the peoples themselves. Not think what they need. And prioritize changing the system. That is the accomplice. Not just, feeling like we were doing something, taking a selfie of us, eating a Navajo taco, still eat them, still come Friday and get them. But, try and actually change the system that's there. Okay? All right. Thank you, guys. And thanks, NASA, for actually believing in me. It was a huge deal because I'm an anthropologist, so there's bad history there. So I was like, this is one of the things probably the thing I'm most proud of here at Adams. Equity Board, Kindred Spirits, and all of you guys for actually showing up and listening, because this is a difficult thing to talk about and to reckon with, right? We like to think that our past is all like perfect and amazing and the greatest thing in the world, right? But there is a lot of really bad history that we can't just wipe under the rug, right? We need to address it, and we need to think about the future and what we can do, what our institution can actually do. Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or, yeah?
Do we as Adams State have any courses on anthropology?
No? That's a very specific one, so no. Maybe we could do like ethnobotany first. Start with something a little bit more general, right? Yeah.
You guys don't know, through the state of Colorado and in kind of partnership with Adams State University, any Native American student that's associated with certain tribes that are tied to Colorado get in-state tuition. We admit them as in-state students. They get to participate in the entitlement programs like College Opportunity Fund with COP, and Pell Grant eligible, get Colorado student grant, plus ultimately whether your children get
Testing, okay. So there's a mural in Richardson Hall in one of the stairwells. And it always, every time I see it, I kind of try to imagine what a Native student would feel looking at that mural. And I know, I don't know, I guess I'm just wondering if anyone else is troubled by that, and what, I don't know that, you know, what could be done, maybe some teaching around it or some engagement with the discussion around it, but.
I think we all know what you're talking about. And yes, like every time I see him, like, oh, like why is that there? But also as an outsider, I don't think I can give like your question was like, what would others think? Like what it's representing. So Lily, do you wanna?
So what's funny is last week in my art class, we actually took a trip to Richardson Hall to look at the museum. And we came back and he wanted us to discuss how we felt looking at everything in the museum. And as a Native, I discussed how the painting and the painting in the museum itself on the wall at the front, and also the upstairs stuff, it all has feelings tied to it. And as a Native, I feel like, yeah, it's a really, really touchy subject to talk about, but also if it wasn't there, people just wouldn't know and there wouldn't be any education on it. But like you're saying, I believe that maybe there should be more talk about it, or maybe a little artist statement about what it actually means, instead of just having it up there and having people guess what it could be. Because everybody in the class talked about it, and there was half the group who said, I love it, it was so beautiful, it was just amazing. And then I was just like, well, there's feelings tied to it. I personally don't like it, but I feel like if there was like more education put on those pieces of art put around campus, I feel like that would have a different look on it than just having it up.
Anyone else?
I think that's good, just to kind of piggyback on that, and I don't know if this is more of a statement or a question, but I love that you brought up policy and how important it is that our Native community should be involved in that policy, because one thing I was just thinking of is that I know for a regular day-to-day in class, we wouldn't allow our students to wear a shirt that has profanity or vulgar images or things like that. But we wouldn't think twice about someone wearing a school or a t-shirt from their high school. Well, there is a school in Arizona, the Red Mesa Unified School District, who serves an indigenous Navajo population. They are the Redskins. So if that student were to come into your class wearing that shirt, you may want to dismiss them out of your class for wearing something that's offensive. However, that's their high school, that's their thing. So I think having that policy with our Native students, being able to help drive that, I think is fantastic.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you again for coming.